Hey there, and welcome to Drowsing Through History. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, we're going to wander back in time. Not to the battlefield or the throne room, but somewhere a little softer, a little stranger. We're slipping into the superstitions and secret whispers of medieval love. So go ahead and get comfortable. Let your eyes grow heavy. There's nothing to do now, no scroll to check, no errand to run. Just the slow unfolding of long-forgotten beliefs, sweet and strange and sometimes downright odd. And you don't even have to stay awake for it. That's the beauty of sleep stories. If you enjoy this, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, even if you only make it to chapter 2 before you're snoring. Subscribe if you want more sleepy wanderings through history. All right, take a breath. Let's begin. When we say love now, we mean 100 different things. Romance, affection, lust, partnership, sometimes just swiping right. But back in the Middle Ages, say from the 1100s to the 1400s, love meant something very different. Or maybe many different things too, just wrapped in chainmail and incense smoke. You see, medieval people didn't have a universal word for dating. There were courtly lovers and arranged marriages, bawdy affairs behind taverns, and sacred unions blessed by bishops. But the idea of falling in love, that sweeping, poetic kind of love, was often seen as irrational, dangerous even, especially for women. Still, people were people, and hearts did what they've always done. They fluttered, they broke, and where there's longing, there's always a little magic. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't just about emotion. It was deeply tied to fate, to ritual, to God, and to the stars. If you fell for someone, you might consult an herbalist, a priest, or an astrologer before making your move. You might dream about them and believe the dream held a divine message. You might even believe that a touch of their hand could curse or cure you. There was no tinder, but there were charms made of wax and bits of hair. There were love letters written in Latin and hidden in sleeves. There were dances and tokens and poems whispered over candlelight. And most of all, there were superstitions, layers and layers of belief about what made someone fall in love or fall out of it. Beliefs passed down by grandmothers and monks, troubadours and thieves. And that's what we're exploring tonight. Coming up in the next chapter, the charms, tokens, and potions of medieval love, including one involving dried frog skin and moonlight. But for now, let's linger a bit longer in this world where love was as much magic as it was feeling. A time when desire was dangerous, rituals were whispered, and even the air around a lover could be caught in a cloth and kept under your pillow. Strange? Yes, but maybe no stranger than trying to define love now. Close your eyes, if they're not closed already. Let your thoughts quiet, like a chapel at dusk. Chapter 2 is just around the corner, so let's say it's the year 1327. You're in a little village with muddy roads and a thatched roof overhead, and your heart utterly wrecked over the baker's apprentice. Or maybe the knight who rides by every Thursday. Or maybe it's the girl who walks to chapel barefoot, always with a book in her hands. And you want them to notice you. You could try smiling. That might work. Or you could try something a little more mysterious. Love charms were everywhere in medieval Europe. Some were sweet, like carved tokens of wood or cloth embroidered with initials. But others were, let's say, more ambitious. One charm involved plucking 3 hairs from the object of your affection, secretly, of course, and then twisting them into a braid with a red thread while saying a spell under your breath. Keep it under your pillow. Supposedly, they dream of you and wake up with a sudden longing. Or maybe you'd carry a pressed flower, not just any flower, but one picked at sunrise on the feast day of a saint known for matchmaking. Saint Agnes, for instance. Some girls would fast, then sleep with a sprig of thyme under their pillow, hoping for a vision of their future husband. Others used bay leaves or even dried rose petals. Now, if you had a few coins to spare and were feeling particularly lovesick, you might visit a local cunning woman, the neighborhood wise woman who dabbled in herbs, healing, and a little bit of magic. She might brew you a love potion. Nothing too wild. Mostly honey, wine, and herbs like vervain or basil. But sometimes, if you were truly desperate, there were stranger ingredients. Powdered snail shell, a drop of your own blood, even crushed pearls. These things weren't FDA approved. They were matters of faith, hope, and maybe a touch of delusion. One old recipe called for you to boil a pigeon heart with cinnamon and cloves, then bury it under your beloved's doorstep. Romantic, if you're into bird-based witchcraft. Another common token was the girdle charm, a ribbon or thread worn around the waist, secretly blessed or spelled by someone who claimed magical knowledge. Some people believed tying a love knot in the thread would bind the other person's desire to your own. The knot itself had to be tied while repeating a rhyme, usually in Latin or a local dialect. And if done correctly, the person was supposed to think of you whenever they wore anything around their middle. And then there were tokens of the heart, literal ones. Not human hearts, of course, but tiny sculpted hearts made of wax or lead or clay, sometimes engraved with initials or symbols. You might give one as a gift or bury it somewhere symbolic, like beneath a tree where you first met. Some charms had to be done at very specific times, during a full moon, or on Midsummer's Eve, or after confession. There were rules, you see. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a force. And like all forces, it had to be handled carefully. Of course, some people thought all of this was dangerous. The church warned against love magic, said it was a sin or worse, a gateway to demonic influence. But when your heart is aching and your stomach's in knots, sometimes a little spell feels like hope. Besides, it's not like modern folks are immune. We still write names in notebooks. We still keep texts and trinkets and lockets. We still wish in our own way. Next, we'll wander into the world of Valentine's Day, medieval edition, where birds, blood, and poetry collide in the strangest ways. For now, let your breath slow down. Let your limbs go heavy. The old charms can wait. You're already drifting into softer places. Today, we think of Valentine's Day as roses, chocolates, maybe a dinner reservation, and a sappy card. But in the Middle Ages, it was something a little different, less corporate, more mystical, and definitely weirder. For starters, no one really knew who Saint Valentine was. There were actually multiple Valentines in early Christian history, and most of them were martyrs. One legend said that Valentine was a Roman priest who secretly married young couples, defying the emperor's order that soldiers remain single. Another said he healed a jailer's blind daughter and wrote her a farewell note signed "From your Valentine." But none of that had anything to do with love at first. St. Valentine's Day was a feast day, not a date night. It was about martyrdom and devotion until a few poetic minds started reshaping it. That shift, we mostly have Geoffrey Chaucer to thank. In the late 1300s, he wrote a poem called Parlement of Foules, Parliament of Birds, where he described birds choosing their mates on St. Valentine's Day. This odd little poem planted a seed in the medieval imagination. Suddenly, mid-February became a moment not just for prayer, but for passion. After Chaucer, others followed. Lovers started exchanging little verses and handmade tokens, pressed flowers, bits of embroidery, or folded parchment hearts sealed with wax. These were early Valentines, long before the Hallmark Isle. But the day still had its stranger elements. Some believed that if you saw a robin on the morning of Valentine's Day, you'd marry a sailor. A sparrow meant you'd marry poor, but be happy. A goldfinch, that meant wealth, though not necessarily love. In some parts of England, girls would wake early on Valentine's Day, climb a hill, and recite a rhyme to summon a vision of their future husband. Something like, "Good morrow to you, Valentine. Curl your locks as I do mine. 2 before and 3 behind. Good Saint Valentine, be kind." Superstitions also warned against giving a gift with your left hand. It meant your love would be false. And don't drop your Valentine card on the way to deliver it. If you did, someone else would steal your luck in love. But here's where things get a little darker. In some rural areas, there were rituals involving animal hearts. A young woman might pierce a bird's heart, usually a sparrow or dove, and bury it under her pillow to dream of her beloved. Others would write a crusher's name on a piece of bread, feed it to a dog, and if the dog ate it, the love was meant to be. Even more unsettling, a charm called the Valentine's binding spell, which involved pricking your finger, writing your beloved's name in your own blood, then burning the parchment at midnight. Dramatic? Yes. But medieval love was not known for subtlety. Valentine's Day in the Middle Ages wasn't candy hearts and rom-coms. It was poetry, prayer, magic, and mystery. It was a tangle of sacred and strange hope and ritual. The feast of a saint turned into a spellbook for longing. Coming up next, forbidden love, coded signals, and how lovers kept their secrets when the whole world was watching. But for now, let that last image fade. Candlelight, a scribbled name, the flutter of wings at dawn. You're doing just fine. Close your eyes, if they're not already. Let your thoughts drift like parchment on a breeze. Chapter 4 is waiting. Whenever you're ready. Love in medieval Europe was rarely simple. There were rules, expectations, entire systems built to keep certain people apart and others dutifully together. If you were noble, your parents likely arranged your match before you even knew what love was. If you were a peasant, your options were limited and your reputation was everything. If you were a cleric, well, technically, you weren't supposed to be in love at all. But love didn't care. It came anyway. In the quiet of a candlelit chapel, in the space between words at a feast, in the glance across the marketplace that lingered a second too long. And when love had to be hidden, it grew clever. In noble courts, where every movement was watched, lovers developed an entire language of small, subtle acts. If a woman dropped her handkerchief during a dance, it could mean, "I'm thinking of you." If the man picked it up and held it to his lips before returning it, that meant, "I feel the same." a twist of a ring, a touch of the chest with 3 fingers, or a ribbon tied in a certain knot. All of these were ways of saying things they couldn't say aloud. Even the way someone walked past you might carry meaning. A shoulder brushed too close, a hand that lingered an extra breath before letting go. In some regions, lovers even developed seasonal codes, gestures or trinkets that changed meaning depending on the feast day or the month. A flower in the hair might mean one thing in Lent, another entirely at midsummer. When gestures weren't enough, they wrote. Secret notes were tucked into the folds of sleeves, hidden inside the pages of prayer books, or passed between servants with a knowing wink. A knight might write a poem to his beloved and sign it only with a symbol. A crescent moon, a single oak leaf, a tiny drawing of a heart pierced with a key. Some couples even used mirror writing, words written backwards so that only someone holding it to a looking glass could read it. One legend tells of a young woman who stitched her messages into embroidery. She made a gift for her beloved sister, a handkerchief, and inside the pattern of roses, she wove tiny letters, so small they could be mistaken for stitching floors. The sister never noticed, but the knight did. Jewelry was just as rich with meaning. Posy rings were simple bands engraved inside with private messages, hidden from view, but close to the skin. One said, "Think of me." Another said, "I'm yours." They were tucked under tunics, hidden by gloves, safe but known. Even colors spoke. Wearing red might mean passion, but also danger. Blue meant loyalty. Green might hint at jealousy, or maybe at hope. A sprig of rosemary, tucked into a sleeve, whispered of memory. And still, all of it was dangerous. A noble woman exposed might be sent to a convent. A village girl could lose everything. And for queer lovers, who existed then as they do now, the stakes were even higher. Secrecy wasn't just thrilling. It was protection. It was survival. But somehow, all these years later, the echoes remain. In stories, in poems, in the folds of old cloth tucked into museum drawers. We remember them, not by name always, but by the cleverness of their signals, the courage of their glances. In the next chapter, we'll wander into the garden, where love bloomed in herbs and petals, and every plant had something to say. But for now, let your breath settle. The candle has burned low. The messages have been sent, and sleep is gently arriving. Let's wander into the garden now. Not a royal one, with marble fountains and sculpted hedges, but something simpler. A monastery herb patch. A cottage yard lined with wild thyme and creeping mint. A corner of green, soft with petals and heavy with old meaning. Because in the Middle Ages, plants didn't just feed or heal. They spoke. There was a whole unspoken language of herbs and flowers. Not quite the Victorian floriography of later centuries, but something older, earthier, and deeply entangled with superstition, magic, and love. Take rosemary, for example. It was believed to strengthen memory, but it was also a sign of fidelity. Brides sometimes wore rosemary in their hair or tucked it into their sleeves on the day of their wedding. If a lover gave you a sprig of rosemary, it meant, remember me, and be true. Lavender was gentler, thought to calm the mind and purify the soul. Some girls would sleep with lavender tucked under their pillows, hoping to dream of their future husband. Others would carry it in secret pouches to keep themselves calm in moments of longing or jealousy. Then there was basil, sacred in some regions, dangerous in others. In certain parts of Italy, It was believed that if a woman placed a pot of basil outside her window, she was signaling that she was ready for love. A man might respond by placing a sprig in his hat when he passed her door. Subtle, not exactly, but effective. Time was for courage, but also for charm. A young knight might sew time into the lining of his cloak, hoping it would make him more attractive or more gallant in his beloved's eyes. Some plants were used in love divination. A girl might pluck petals from a daisy while whispering, "He loves me not," a practice that likely goes back much further than the rhyme we know today. Others might throw apple peels over their shoulder and try to read the initials formed on the ground. And then there were the riskier remedies. A love charm might include powdered valerian root, known to draw cats, and supposedly lovers. Some potions included parsley, not for flavor, but because of its long association with lust. More ambitious spells might use dried rose hips, steeped under moonlight and stirred with a silver spoon. But not all plant magic was herbal. Some lovers simply gave flowers. A violet meant modesty. A red rose meant passion, of course. But a white lily? That was purity, or sometimes mourning. It all depended on when and how it was given, and flowers had to be picked at the right time. Some said love blossoms picked at midsummer carried the strongest energy. Others insisted that a flower gathered at dawn, especially on a saint's feast day, held special power. If you received a bouquet with fern, it was a sign someone was watching you silently. If there was honeysuckle, it meant devotion. A marigold, that could mean pain, or pride, or both. In many villages, wise women, sometimes called herb wives or green witches, were known to craft little love bundles made of herbs and tied with red thread. You'd carry it with you, or sleep with it under your pillow. Some believed it would draw affection towards you. Others believed it helped keep a lover faithful. But as with most things in the medieval world, the line between charm and sin was thin. The church warned against using herbs in spells. They were gifts from God, yes, but using them to manipulate love could be dangerous. Still, the bundles were made, the petals were pressed, the little pouches passed quietly from one hand to another. Because sometimes love needs help. And maybe, in a time when women had so little power, these rituals, real or imagined, gave them a sense of agency, a sense that they could choose something, influence something, even if it was just in dreams. In the next chapter, we'll lift our eyes to the sky, because medieval lovers also looked to the stars for signs and answers. But for now, the garden is quiet, the herbs are resting in the moonlight, and sleep, soft as lavender, is curling around your shoulders. Chapter 6 will be here when you are. Let's look up now, way up, to the stars. Because in the Middle Ages, love didn't just grow in gardens or bloom in the heart. It was written, people believed, in the sky, written in the moon's phase, the stars' alignment, the exact minute of your birth. Astrology wasn't fringe science then. It was serious business. Monks kept star charts. Doctors consulted planetary hours. And yes, people looked to the heavens to understand their love lives. Your zodiac sign mattered. Not just in a personality quiz kind of way, but in a real, practical sense. Were you a Taurus? That might mean you were loyal, but stubborn. A Gemini? Clever, but not to be trusted. Sagittarius? Wild-hearted and impossible to tie down. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? But it wasn't just about personality. In medieval belief, each sign was ruled by a planet, and those planets had powers. Venus, of course, ruled love. Mars ruled passion, and sometimes trouble. The moon represented emotion and change. If Venus and Mars were in harmony at your birth, some believed you'd be lucky in love. If they clashed, your heart might be a battlefield. Many people knew their sun sign, what we'd call it now, but truly devoted lovers might consult an astrologer to cast full birth charts. These charts could take days to prepare, marking not just where the planets were when you were born, but where they were when you met your beloved. A perfect match wasn't made by chemistry. It was drawn in circles and angles with little inked stars. Even the moon's phase played a role. Some believed it was best to propose love during a waxing moon, when things were growing. A waning moon. That was the time to let go. And weddings held during eclipses were considered risky. Beautiful, maybe, but doomed to shadow. People used star charts to time everything. When to write a love letter, when to visit someone, when to light a candle and say a prayer for their affection. There were planetary hours, slices of the day ruled by different celestial bodies, and each one had its own flavor. Want to confess your feelings? Wait for the hour of Venus. Want to charm someone? Try Mercury's hour instead. And let's not forget omens in the sky. A bright shooting star could mean love on the horizon, or heartbreak if it vanished too fast. A blood moon was said to stir deep desires. A comet? That was more ambiguous. Some thought it meant dramatic new beginnings. Others stayed indoors, waiting for it to pass. One story tells of a young woman who refused to speak to her suitor until Mars left retrograde. Another woman, a nun by profession and a poet by spirit, wrote of how she fell in love on a night when 3 planets aligned over the monastery roof. She called it a holy accident. Her letters still survive. Even birthdays had love power. If 2 people shared a birthday, it was seen as a sign. If they were born under opposing signs, say Leo and Aquarius, they might be drawn together, then pulled apart again and again. Of course, not everyone believed in the stars. The church warned against astrology, saying it interfered with divine will. But many priests quietly kept charts anyway. Human hearts are curious things, and the sky, well, it's hard not to look. So they looked, and they asked, and they hoped. And maybe that's the truest part of all this. Not that the stars control love, but that people in all times have searched for patterns, for signs, for reassurance that what they feel is real and fated, and not just some lonely dream. In the next chapter, we'll come back down to earth and talk about how love was tested, not with words, but with trials, real ones, painful ones, and sometimes deadly ones. But not just yet. For now, rest under your own stars. Let them glow above you, silent and ancient. You don't need to understand them. Just know they've always been watching. And maybe, just maybe, they've always known your heart. Let's look up now, way up, to the stars. Because in the Middle Ages, love didn't just grow in gardens or bloom in the heart. It was written, people believed, in the sky. Written in the moon's phase, the stars' alignment, the exact minute of your birth. Astrology wasn't fringe science then. It was serious business. Monks kept star charts. Doctors consulted planetary hours. And yes, people looked to the heavens to understand their love lives. Your zodiac sign mattered. Not just in a personality quiz kind of way, but in a real, practical sense. Were you a Taurus? That might mean you were loyal, but stubborn. A Gemini? Clever, but not to be trusted. Sagittarius, wild-hearted and impossible to tie down. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? But it wasn't just about personality. In medieval belief, each sign was ruled by a planet, and those planets had powers. Venus, of course, ruled love. Mars ruled passion, and sometimes trouble. The moon represented emotion and change. If Venus and Mars were in harmony at your birth, some believed you'd be lucky in love. If they clashed, your heart might be a battlefield. Many people knew their sun sign, what we'd call it now, but truly devoted lovers might consult an astrologer to cast full birth charts. These charts could take days to prepare, marking not just where the planets were when you were born, but where they were when you met your beloved. A perfect match wasn't made by chemistry. It was drawn in circles and angles with little inked stars. Even the moon's face played a role. Some believed it was best to propose love during a waxing moon, when things were growing. A waning moon. That was the time to let go. And weddings held during eclipses were considered risky. Beautiful, maybe, but doomed to shadow. People used star charts to time everything. When to write a love letter, when to visit someone, when to light a candle and say a prayer for their affection. There were planetary hours, slices of the day ruled by different celestial bodies, and each one had its own flavor. Want to confess your feelings? Wait for the hour of Venus. Want to charm someone? Try Mercury's hour instead. And let's not forget omens in the sky. A bright shooting star could mean love on the horizon, or heartbreak if it vanished too fast. A blood moon was said to stir deep desires. A comet? That was more ambiguous. Some thought it meant dramatic new beginnings. Others stayed indoors, waiting for it to pass. One story tells of a young woman who refused to speak to her suitor until Mars left retrograde. Another woman, a nun by profession and a poet by spirit, wrote of how she fell in love on a night when 3 planets aligned over the monastery roof. She called it a holy accident. Her letters still survive. Even birthdays had love power. If 2 people shared a birthday, it was seen as a sign. If they were born under opposing signs, say Leo and Aquarius, they might be drawn together, then pulled apart again and again. Of course, not everyone believed in the stars. The church warned against astrology, saying it interfered with divine will. But many priests quietly kept charts anyway. Human hearts are curious things, and the sky, well, it's hard not to look. So they looked, and they asked, and they hoped. And maybe that's the truest part of all this. Not that the stars control love, but that people in all times have searched for patterns, for signs, for reassurance that what they feel is real and fated, and not just some lonely dream. In the next chapter, we'll come back down to earth and talk about how love was tested, not with words, but with trials, real ones, painful ones, and sometimes deadly ones. But not just yet. For now, rest under your own stars. Let them glow above you, silent and ancient. You don't need to understand them. Just know they've always been watching. And maybe, just maybe, they've always known your heart. Let's drift now into candlelit halls, into gardens heavy with the scent of jasmine and warm stone, into a time of longing glances and lutes played beneath high windows. This is the world of courtly love. It wasn't quite real, not in the way marriages or treaties were, but it shaped how people dreamed about love for centuries. Courtly love was more performance than relationship, a ritual, a game of passion held at arm's length. It was especially popular in the noble courts of France Italy, and southern England during the 12th and 13th centuries, and it often centered on one thing: loving someone you could never have. Usually, it went like this. A knight, noble, brave, and often a little dramatic, would fall for a highborn lady. Maybe she was married, maybe she was unattainable for some other reason, and instead of trying to win her in secret or scandal, he would worship her from afar. He'd write poems about her eyes. He'd perform great deeds in her name. He might even wear a token, a sleeve, a ribbon during a tournament, dedicating his victory to her beauty. And she might acknowledge him with a glance, a smile, maybe a word, maybe not. It was about yearning, not fulfillment, about the ache of love that can't be touched, only felt. This idea came to life through the words of troubadours, traveling poets and musicians who sang of love, loyalty, and loss. They were like medieval singer-songwriters, armed with lyres and a flair for metaphors. They'd wander from castle to castle, performing songs in the local dialect, usually Occitan or Old French, telling stories of doomed lovers, brave devotion, and hearts too full to bear. Their songs weren't always sweet. Some were playful, some were sharp, some mourned love, while others teased it. One famous troubadour, Arnaud Daniel, once wrote about love as fire under snow, beautiful, hidden, burning. Another, Bernard de Ventadorn, compared his unrequited love to a bird flying into a closed window over and over again. Women wrote too. Though fewer in number, the Troubadours were female poets and musicians who flipped the script. They sang of desiring men or other women with clarity and boldness. They weren't passive objects of love. They were voices, sharp and alive. Courtly love was often idealized as chaste, more emotional than physical. But that doesn't mean it was innocent. It could be charged, intense, even dangerous. Some nobles risked everything to pursue these impossible romances. Some wrote about loves they'd never spoken aloud. There were rules, of course. Whole guides were written on how to conduct yourself as a courtly lover, how to speak, how to suffer beautifully, how to accept rejection with grace. It was all very formal, very poetic, and very impractical. Still, the idea took root. It shaped the way love was talked about, dreamed about. Even centuries later, the language of courtly love echoed in Shakespeare's sonnets, in romantic novels, in modern songs. We still tell stories of star-crossed lovers. We still write poems for people we'll never confess to. Maybe that's because there's something undeniably human about longing, about loving from a distance, about putting your heart in someone's hands and expecting nothing in return. In the next chapter, we'll leave the halls of poetry and walk into stranger territory, where love met omens and animals, and messages arrived not in rhyme, but in feathers, howls, and flickers in the dark. But for now, let the lute fall silent, let the poems fade, let your own heart rest, not in yearning, but in softness. Sleep is a kind of courtly love too, elusive, patient, always circling closer. Love has always had its messengers, letters, glances, pressed flowers. But in the medieval imagination, those messengers weren't always human. Sometimes they had wings, or hooves, or glowing eyes that watched from the edge of the woods. In the Middle Ages, people believed that animals carried omens, signs from the universe, or from God, about love, fate, and desire. And the creatures you saw or dreamed of might say more about your heart than your own words ever could. Let's start with the dove, gentle, white, and soft-spoken. The dove was associated with purity and faithful love. If two doves nested near your home, it was considered a blessing, a sign that love would endure. If you saw a single dove circling overhead on a feast day, it meant someone was thinking of you from afar. Swans were another symbol of devotion. They were believed to mate for life, and so they came to represent not just love, but loyalty. A noblewoman might stitch a swan onto a lover's tunic as a sign of constancy. Seeing a pair of swans gliding together on water, especially at twilight, was thought to mean your feelings were returned. But not all omens were gentle. A howling dog at night, especially one seen near your doorway, was thought to be an omen of heartbreak. Some said it meant a love would end. Others believed it signaled betrayal. And if the dog was black, the warning was stronger still. Cats, especially black ones, were more complicated. They were both feared and revered, tied to witchcraft, yes, but also to mystery and feminine power. Some women were said to whisper their secrets to cats, asking them to carry their wishes to the one they loved. If a cat curled around your feet during a moment of decision, it was a sign to trust your heart. Then there were the birds. Birds have always flown through folklore, especially in matters of love. A nightingale singing near your window was a sign of romance coming soon, or of someone nearby with a heart too full to speak. Owls, by contrast, warned of secrets, of things not said, of watching when no one knows they're being watched. In parts of the countryside, lovers believed that seeing a fox during a walk meant someone was deceiving you. Foxes were clever, sly, and beautiful, and not to be trusted. But seeing a hare, that was lucky. Hares were symbols of fertility and desire. If a hare crossed your path on the morning of a feast day, especially a spring one, it was said to mean a proposal was coming soon. In some villages, couples would release doves or pigeons on their wedding day, and whichever bird flew higher was said to be the more dominant partner in the marriage. If they stayed together, that was a sign of harmony. If they flew apart, well, not ideal. People also believed in animal dreams. If you dreamed of a stag, it meant noble love. If you dreamed of a snake, it meant temptation. And if you dreamed of a horse, running free or standing still, it meant you were at a crossroads in your heart. Even household animals carried meaning. A rooster crowing at night might signal jealousy. A cow that refused to eat on a wedding morning meant the bride had doubts. A mouse appearing in the bedchamber? Best not to ask. All of this might sound like superstition, and it was, but it also came from a deeper sense that the world was alive with signs, that love didn't come from nowhere, that it left traces, clues, echoes, and maybe that's still true. Maybe we still look for signs in song lyrics, in dreams, in unexpected encounters. Maybe part of love is the wonder of not knowing what's real and what's fate. In the next chapter, we'll walk into darker territory. The shadows of love gone wrong, breakups, betrayal, and the strange ways medieval people tried to end what had once been sacred. But for now, the night is quiet. No omens here, just your own steady breath and the soft hush of the world going still. You're safe, and sleep is closer than ever. Not every love story ends in poetry. Sometimes it ends with a slammed door, or a whispered rumor, or a ritual no one talks about afterward. Even in the Middle Ages, in all their ceremony and superstition, people fell out of love. People left, or were left, and they didn't always handle it with grace. Breakups weren't always called breakups, of course, but there were ways to dissolve an arrangement, or curse it, or bury it, quite literally. Among the nobility, the cleanest way out was annulment, usually granted by the church. It meant a marriage had never been valid in the first place. The most common reason? Lack of consummation. Sometimes there were witnesses, sometimes just sworn statements. Other grounds included coercion, consanguinity, being too closely related, or the revelation of a prior vow, like a secret betrothal or holy order. But for ordinary people, ending a relationship or surviving one that ended was messier. Some practiced a ritual known as unbinding. It wasn't officially sanctioned, but it happened anyway. A couple might return the gifts they'd exchanged, especially if they'd included love tokens, like rings, handkerchiefs, or charms. In some villages, they would walk backward away from one another at sunset, each holding a candle, then blow the candles out at the same time. That was supposed to sever the tie between them. And yes, there were breakup spells too. A few medieval spell books, especially from France and Germany, included rituals designed to cool passion or break emotional bonds. One involved soaking a lover's name in vinegar, then burying it under a thorn bush. Another called for grinding their hair into ash and scattering it in running water. Petty, maybe, but heartbreak makes people do strange things. Then there were the public accusations. If a woman was suspected of seducing a man, she might be called before the church to answer for it. If a man abandoned a woman he'd promised to marry, her family could take him to court. These weren't modern lawsuits. They were moral disputes, aired out in front of neighbors and clergy. In more rural areas, superstitions filled the gaps. Some believed that if a person wanted to rid themselves of lingering affection, they had to wash their hands in 3 different rivers. One for the memory, one for the pain, and one for peace. Others carried herbs to forget, especially sage, believed to cool the blood and clear the mind. One grim tradition involved burning letters or tokens while saying a specific phrase, "As this fire takes you, so I am free." Some burned entire love spells they'd once used, trying to undo what they'd once begged for. And still, the heartbreak lingered. Poets wrote of love gone sour, of betrayal, loss, and bitter farewells. Some wrote under false names, pouring grief into verse. Others didn't write at all, only disappeared from court or vanished into the countryside, love left trailing behind them like fog. And then there were the quiet ones, the people who didn't rage or perform rituals, who simply kept the memory and folded it away, who never spoke the name again, but thought of it when the wind shifted or a certain song played. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know that even centuries ago, people struggled with letting go, that they lit candles and cried and tried strange methods to move on, that they were human, just like us. In the next chapter, we'll turn toward peace again, a soft goodbye, not to a lover, but to the story itself, a gentle closing. But for now, let this chapter drift. Let the old heartaches soften into mist. You don't have to hold on to anything tonight. You're already past it, so here we are, at the edge of it. We've wandered through charms and potions, through secret notes and flickering starlight. We've watched nights sigh under windows, herbs steep under moons, and lovers pass signals in silence. We've heard of doves and duels, of hope and heartbreak, and of the strange, ancient ways people have always tried to understand love. And now we rest. Because in the end, love is still a mystery. It was in the Middle Ages, with all their candles and rituals and whispered prayers. And it is now, in our modern world of messages sent and deleted, of late-night longings and quiet hope. People have always searched for ways to explain the ache in the chest, the flutter in the stomach, the sudden heat in the face when someone smiles. And sometimes they've reached for magic, for stars, for charms carved from wax, or poems scrawled on the back of a tavern receipt. Maybe they knew, deep down, that love can't really be captured, but it can be honored, admired, offered, even mourned. We still do it. We keep little objects, notes, photos, bits of fabric. We still tie meaning to color, to timing, to coincidence. We still make playlists, cry in the car, write and erase messages we'll never send. We still search the skies in our own way. Maybe love is less about rules and more about recognition, about seeing someone, really seeing them, and letting them see you too. And whether it lasts an hour or a lifetime, that kind of connection leaves a trace, a warm shadow, a breath on the skin, a memory that curls around your thoughts when you're standing in line or folding laundry or lying in bed like this, listening to a stranger tell you stories. And maybe that's why we tell these stories, to remember that we're not alone, that others have longed and loved and hoped before us, that the ache is ancient and the dream is shared. So let this story fade now. Let the words dissolve into quiet. The candles have burned low. The birds have gone still. And your own heart, it's safe. If you've made it this far, whether wide awake or barely holding on to the edge of sleep, thank you. Thank you for listening, for wondering, for being here. More stories will come. There's always more to tell. But for now, close your eyes, if they're not already closed. You're not alone, and you are, in some quiet, beautiful way, loved. Good night.